Hello, and welcome to Rejuvenated Women, Impeccable Health for High-Performing Women. I'm Dr. Alex Swenson Ridley, your host, and today marks a pretty big milestone for us. This is episode 50, and we've been at this for about a year now, which I was pausing to reflect on this and just kind of what a milestone that is for me and in my own life, and having this platform and this opportunity to share with so many women around the world. We actually, one of our big achievements on the show has been we hit the top 150 list in Ireland and Great Britain, which is awesome because it means that we're spreading the news far and wide. So I'm super excited about that. I just wanted to take a second and thank our the listeners and the people who have engaged in helping me create this, because I create this for you, and ideally it serves you in some way. So I'm excited about some of the things that have happened. And in just taking a minute to pause and reflect, obviously we launched this thing in 2020, and we all know 2020 has been a lot of things. And I was really, drawn to this idea of reflection and revisiting a conversation that I had with a couple of different people on the show. I know one of them was episode 18, where I talked about the dark side of resiliency with Tracy Litt. And so if you haven't ever listened to that episode, it's one that's worth going and listening to several times throughout the year, just to re-engage in that. But I wanted to revisit this conversation. And part of where that came from is, a lot of us have been through a lot in this last year. I just recently, or this morning, was reading an article that a good friend of mine, Alba Cabral, she's a psychologist in New York, who was actually supposed to come on the show. And, our schedules just never connected because she ended up being deployed to do grief counseling for people who lost loved ones due to COVID-19. And she just wrote this heart-wrenching article that I'll share a link in the show notes about her experience doing all of that. And what it shed light on what some people, and I think a lot more people than we realize, have really gone through in terms of watching someone walk out the door to go to the emergency room and then never come back, and not being able to see them to say goodbye, or having to have a healthcare worker to hold the phone up to say their goodbyes as they're drawing their last breaths. Like, heart-wrenching stuff, right? And for a lot of us, no matter what your opinions are on COVID-19 or how it's impacted your family, I've really come to realize that so many of us have been impacted in some dark ways, right? Like, maybe it's not death, but for example, in our own household, I realized a couple of weeks ago, I signed my son up for a junior Lego thing through his homeschool program. And, I was excited about it. I thought he would be really excited about it. He loves to build Legos. He loves kids. He loves, being social. And he hasn't had much of that in this last year. And we got there, and he was unbelievably anxious, like would not go in the room, was worried about what other kids would think about him. And finally I ended up we just left because he was so scared. Anxiety is the best word I can come up with for that. And that is, something that I've never seen from him before. And that I think has really come from this period of, isolation. And there's been good things about being home, but there's also those really hard things. And so what I wanted to talk about on this episode, in this culmination of reflection, I was trying to decide what to do. Like, 1 year is a big deal. 50 episodes is a big deal in my mind. And, when we hit 100, then 100 will be a big deal. We probably won't really celebrate till we hit another 100. But when you look back and just kind of look at what's happened in your life over the last year, and I'm not about dwelling on the negative things. I think, we can get sucked into a lot of depression or a lot of like really ugly places, but we also have to be able to pause and deal with some of this stuff, right? And this is the conversation I wanted to have, finding the balance between that resilience. And to me, the resiliency is, the strength. It is a strength, and it's a fortitude to keep going, to, keep moving, to constantly be pushing forward. And I've definitely done this at times in my life. Like when I was going through my divorce, there were times where I would just put my head down and be like, one foot in front of the other, have to keep moving, have to keep going, like have to keep moving forward. And there's a time and a place for that. And many of you may be in that place right now. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but at some point we have to be able to pause long enough to deal with the emotions that come up around whatever has transpired in the last year. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's a loss. I would imagine it's loss on some level, loss of a job, loss of a home, loss of a career, a spouse, your sanity, whatever it is, being stuck at home with kids all the time. But, we have to be able to create that time and that space to pause and actually grieve. And I've been having this conversation with a lot of the women that I coach as well, because, some of them are dealing with a parent passed away from COVID, or, just this whole sequela of things happen. But it's so hard to actually find that time to process. So that's the first thing I really wanted to encourage with this. There's kind of three parts to this conversation that I wanted to have today. So, we have to find the time to actually process and to recognize there's there's a time to be strong and to put your best foot forward and put your brave face on and all of that. And that is what keeps us moving and keeps us going forward. But we can also be guilty of using that as an excuse to not really deal with what's going on and not really heal. And when we don't really heal, we end up carrying around, resentment or frustration, anger, any of the emotions that can come along with grief, which there's 7 of them. You can be in denial, you can be frustrated, angry, you can be extra sad and depressed, you can, there's kind of this whole cycle of stuff, and you could be experiencing any of those things at any given time. But we have to be willing to pause long enough to acknowledge them and then have something to do with them. And I just want to preface this. I realize I'm getting into some more like psychology stuff, and I'm not a psychologist or a counselor or any of these things, but so maybe that's a tool that you use. This was going to be my point number 2 is, you got to find the places and the ways that you are able to process some of this stuff. I'm a little congested this morning, so excuse my frog throat. We have to, especially for us women, we process stress differently. They've done a lot of research out there on this, and, I don't want to get into the gender conversation, but there is actual neurology research that shows that fundamentally men and women are different in just how our brains function and how we do stuff. And so when it comes to stress and high stress things, one of the main ways that we as women process that and de-stress is not through fight or flight. Fight or flight is that like, okay, I'm going to beat something up or I need to run away, right? That's the male response. And this is, you can find lots of articles out there that talk about this, but that's the male response. For us women, and I've talked about this before, but we need to tend and befriend. So we need to make sure everyone is okay around us, our family, our community, our kids, like all that, our household. We need to make sure it's okay. And then we need to sit down and talk about it, have a glass of wine, whatever it is, but we need that outlet to talk about it and to process it. And what I've found in my work recently, and you're probably experiencing this, is that so many of us are lacking that befriend period because we've been in isolation. We've been keeping our social, our groups small. We've been either scared or following the rules or, just dealing with as much as we can handle. And it doesn't really involve friendships and relationships. And I've seen a lot of women who have, lost some of that connection with someone outside of their family unit to just help them process through this time. So, in this like conversation of, okay, what do we do with this? We got to pause. We got to, take time to not just be resilient, but to really allow ourselves to grieve and to process. Does that look like finding a counselor that you can work with? Telemedicine has become this huge, amazing thing. It's something that I utilize and practice now and love, and I don't see it going away anywhere. So, that's an option that's very readily available for anybody who has a phone, basically. Is it reconnecting with a friend, whether it's through phone calls or a socially distanced walk or, whatever it is, and just being able to have that place to process again. Or maybe it's just reaching for your journal and making time to, to stream of conscious, just write out all the stuff that you dealt with in the last year, or what you need to grieve, what you need to just get out, what you need to let out. Because when we don't let it out, when we don't allow ourselves to process, when we don't get past I'm just going to be resilient, and I think there's a difference between resiliency and what I think of like I'm of very German descent, and so I can have this really stoic, like, I don't show any emotion and I'm just going to keep going and, it's not a big deal, but inside it is, right? And I've learned over the years, when we leave that stuff buried inside and don't let it out, don't express it in some way, whether it's talking to somebody else or yourself or you're painting or, a lot of times processing that is just tapping into our creative side. Like I feel so much better when I play my violin or, sit down and draw with my kid, whatever it is. But when we don't let that out, it leads to problems down the road. Our stress stays really high, even if you don't experience it that way. We start to have hormone issues and emotional issues. One of the big things that I talk about with the thyroid, if you look at more of the Eastern philosophy with the body and how it works and all of that, thyroid actually has a lot to do with not expressing your emotions. And so when I had thyroid issues, I was coming out of a marriage where I never expressed my emotions. I didn't say what was on my mind because it was scary and I never knew how it would be what the reaction would be. And so I just kept it all bottled in. So if you're doing some of that because it's either, too scary to go there, and some of you may be experiencing things where you need some outside support. I was having this conversation with a client yesterday. She just did a detox with me and she's got not anything related to COVID, but there's a lot of trauma that happened earlier in her life that she's just never dealt with. And she's this awesome, powerful, leader, life coach, massage therapist, yogi, like super awesome woman, right? But she's got this stuff she's never dealt with. And she was like, it's more at the surface now, and I'll kind of go up to the edge of that, but I don't want to go into it because I don't know how to deal with that or what to do with it or where it's going to go, right? And so that's the situation where you need some probably professional outside support to come in and really, come alongside that. But the point is, we've got to do something with it, because the third piece of this is until we really let that stuff go. And I don't mean just bury it and be like, I'm not dealing with that anymore. I mean, deal with it, get it out, go through all the emotions of grief. It could take a while to really get through this, get through the bitterness, the resentment, the anger, the hopelessness, the despair, all of those negative emotions that might be tied to some stuff this year, the anxiety. There's so many things that have happened, and really just allow yourself to let it go. I'm not going to start singing the song. I think I've sung it before, but we and truly go through a healing process, whether that means forgiving someone or something or yourself, or letting go of guilt that you may feel around how something went down, or letting go of if you feel like you've been at the effect of other people. Even I've dealt with a situation with the building that I own this past year where like the bank just would not work with me in any way. And I'm like, I've literally done everything I can. We finally came to an agreement. But, sometimes there's things that are outside of our control, right? It's an illusion that we're ever in control, but we like to feel that way. But we have to be able to just pause and let that go so that we can be the best version of ourselves possible. And so that our resilience isn't tied so much to, just pushing forward despite circumstances. And there's a time and a place for that. A lot of these stories that I've read, especially from my friend, Dr. Alba, who wrote this article about her experience, it feels like, we've gone to war, like people not getting to be with their loved ones when they die and, just getting their ashes in the mail, or, not getting to say goodbye. Like that's the closest thing I could come up with through that. And, there is an element of like, we need some resilience just to get through that, right? To keep living and not wallow in despair. And I'm not encouraging any of you to do that, but at some point we do have to pick our heads up and be able to work through the emotions and just get us to a healthier point where, we are surviving again, or not surviving. I mean, we're thriving again and not just surviving. So hopefully this just gives you some time to pause. That was my main goal with this, is just to get you to pause and really, take some time to reflect whether you did it for the new year or not. I feel like New Year's time is, we're all wrapped in like, what are our goals and what do we want to do and what's going to be different? But until we deal with some of this stuff, until we deal with the yuck that, whether it was 2020 or before that, or, unrelated to COVID or in this pandemic or what, we have to deal with it in order to be able to move forward, and to move forward in a healthy way where we're not using our resilience as a crutch rather than something that really makes us strong and getting out there and going for it. So I hope this really helps serve you. If this conversation is touching on some of you and you're thinking like, how is resilience a dark thing? Episode 18 of the show, it's the dark side of resilience, where Tracy Litt and I had a really amazing conversation around this whole concept as well. But, whether it's listening to this podcast or getting in with a counselor or getting back with one of your best friends, if you have that kind of close relationship with somebody where you can really process and they're your people and you can come together, getting a coach. A lot of what I do is just holding the space for these conversations to happen. And there's things I feel comfortable with, and there's things that are outside my realm of expertise and would be better served by a mental health practitioner or someone in that realm. But finding whatever that outlet is going to be to really help you process, heal, and then making the time for it, because that is where so many of us fail as women, and where I've found myself going down dark rabbit holes where I am unhealthy, and it starts to manifest in other ways when I don't take the time to deal with it. So that's my encouragement for you today. We will be back next week. I have a really long string of interviews that I'm really excited about. We're recording the next one actually tomorrow. And so those are going to start coming out rapid fire. We have got some incredible women and topics that we're going to be talking about that I'm super excited to share with you. So check back next week and we will see you then.